Spring 1943, North Atlantic. A German U-boat slips beneath the waves after a fruitless hunt, its commander confident he can ride out yet another British counterattack. For years, his crew has survived depth-charge barges by relying on a familiar pattern. Dive deep, change course sharply, wait out the explosions, and resurface hours later. They have endured hundreds of detonations, thunderous concussions that rattle steel bulkheads and darken compartments with shaken rust. But they have learned that noise does not equal danger. Most depth charges, despite their terrifying spectacle, rarely strike close enough to crack a pressure hull. The men know the statistics, even if unofficial, thousands of attacks carried out by Allied escorts, and only a small fraction resulting in destroyed submarines. This has shaped their confidence, their tactics, and their expectations of survival. But as the U-boat levels off at depth, its hydrophone operator catches something different. Not the heavy churn of a destroyer passing overhead, nor the pattern of delayed, staggered detonations that depth charges create. Instead, he hears a brief mechanical thump, a sound so faint and abrupt that it barely registers. No splash, no rolling fuse, no countdown. Just a single, almost polite percussion above them. This moment, so quiet compared to the violence they are used to, is exactly what German commanders came to fear. Because by 1943, the Royal Navy had begun deploying a weapon that altered the logic of anti-submarine warfare entirely. A weapon that did not rely on guesswork, did not create noisy underwater shockwaves when it missed, and did not break sonar contact at the moment when contact mattered most. A weapon that arrived silently, struck with precision, and killed outright. To understand why German submarine crews came to dread this system far more than any depth charge, we must first look at the tactical reality Britain faced. Early in the Battle of the Atlantic, depth charges were the standard tool for hunting U-boats, but their flaws were evident. The moment a destroyer passed over a submarine to drop charges, sonar contact was lost. In the seconds that followed, a U-boat commander had time to turn, dive, or slip away. Even if the charges detonated close enough to damage, they often failed to deliver a fatal blow. Most U-boats escaped because the geometry of the attack favored the hunted, not the hunter. And as this imbalance grew clearer, the Royal Navy began searching for a solution, one that would strike before the U-boat could vanish into silence. The Royal Navy's search for a solution began with a simple, brutal truth. By late 1942, the mathematics of anti-submarine warfare were against them. Escorts were launching thousands of depth charges a month, yet only a tiny percentage scored hits. Admiralty reports showed that a U-boat could survive dozens, even hundreds, of attacks during its operational life. Many British captains privately admitted that depth charging felt more like intimidation than destruction. The explosions shattered morale, shook compartments, and forced U-boats deep, but they rarely delivered certainty. For Britain, that uncertainty was deadly. Merchant ships continued to sink, convoys stretched thin across the Atlantic, and Germany's U-boat arm believed it held the strategic initiative. The problem lay not in British bravery or seamanship but in physics. A depth charge detonated at a preset depth, not at the submarine's actual position. It required predicting where a submerged, maneuvering target would be by the time the charge reached that depth, an estimate often off by tens of meters. Worse, the kill radius of even a heavy depth charge was astonishingly small. Unless the detonation occurred within a few meters of the pressure hull, the blast might damage equipment or buckle some plates, but it would not sink the boat. This small margin of error meant that even a well-placed pattern often achieved nothing more than forcing a U-boat to go quiet. Meanwhile, the act of attacking broke sonar contact at the most critical moment. British escorts had to pass directly over the submarine to deploy their charges, creating a blind zone beneath the ship where sonar could not penetrate. In those seconds, the U-boat commander had complete freedom to alter course, slip under a thermal layer, or accelerate into darkness. The entire tactical model favored the U-boat's ability to react faster than the escort could correct. British scientists and naval officers recognized that a breakthrough required overturning this geometry. They needed a weapon that allowed an escort to attack while still tracking the submarine, one that struck ahead of the ship rather than behind it. And it needed to detonate only on contact, eliminating the seismic chaos that masked sonar returns after a depth charge attack. If such a system could be created, it would not merely improve accuracy. It would transform the psychology of the hunt, replacing the thunderous uncertainty of depth charges with a quiet, lethal precision Germany was unprepared for. This need for precision would soon lead to the development of a radically different anti-submarine weapon, one that changed the course of the Atlantic War. The breakthrough began with an unlikely pair. Captain Charles Hedgehog, a Canadian chemist serving in the Royal Navy's scientific branch, and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker, an inventive but often controversial engineer. Blacker had been experimenting with a spigot mortar, a launcher that fired projectiles without needing a traditional gun barrel. The concept was simple but radical, and at first the Admiralty showed little interest. Yet Hedgehog immediately recognized its potential for anti-submarine warfare. If adapted correctly, a forward-firing spigot system could project multiple contact bombs ahead of an escort vessel, letting the ship maintain sonar contact throughout the attack. In early 1941, this idea was pushed forward despite skepticism from officers who trusted depth charges out of habit more than effectiveness. Testing at sea made the case unmistakably clear. A prototype launcher fired a tight pattern of small, streamlined bombs roughly 250 yards in front of the ship. These bombs sank rapidly and detonated only upon physical impact with a submarine's hull. That single requirement, contact, was revolutionary. It meant that for the first time, a British escort could fire while still seeing the submarine on sonar, track its movement during the bomb's descent, and launch a second attack almost instantly if the first pattern missed. There was no deafening wash of underwater explosions to mask sonar returns, no need to circle back blindly, and no long interval for the U-boat to reposition or vanish. The Admiralty's resistance faded quickly. Churchill himself intervened, approving the weapon for rapid production. The new device was named Hedgehog, partly for the shape its forward-facing bombs formed on the launcher, and partly because it behaved unlike any anti-submarine weapon before it. A full salvo projected up to 24 contact bombs in an elliptical pattern designed to match the typical size and movement envelope of a submerged U-boat. Each bomb carried enough torpex to breach a pressure hull instantly. But their true power lay not in explosive yield, but in probability. If even one struck the target, the submarine would be destroyed outright. And if none struck, the sea remained silent. No missed detonations, no clues for the U-boat captain, no disruption to sonar. This silence was transformative. For decades, submarine warfare had been defined by concussive blasts and chaotic shockwaves. Hedgehog replaced all of that with a quiet threat descending through the dark, unseen and unheard until it reached its mark. When Hedgehog entered operational service in 1942, the Royal Navy faced a new challenge, convincing escort captains to trust a weapon that behaved nothing like the depth charges they had relied on for years. Early results were mixed. Some crews treated Hedgehog as an experimental supplement, firing it cautiously and reverting to familiar patterns when doubt crept in. On paper, its advantages were undeniable: no blind attack run, no loss of sonar contact, no disruption from missed explosions, but habit and tradition weighed heavily in wartime decision-making. Many captains had spent years perfecting their depth-charge tactics, and abandoning those instincts required more than theory. The Admiralty responded by demanding detailed after-action reports from every ship equipped with Hedgehog. These reports revealed a consistent pattern. Whenever crews used the weapon exactly as designed, success rates climbed dramatically. A small cadre of officers at Londonderry's anti-submarine training base, HMS Ferret, began studying the engagements in depth. They recognized that Hedgehog was not merely a new tool, it required a new way of thinking. Instead of charging directly over a contact, escorts needed to maintain steady sonar tracking, calculate the submarine's future position, and fire ahead with confidence. It was a shift from brute force bombardment to controlled, data-driven precision. As training improved, results followed. Captains who fully embraced the new method saw kill rates several times higher than depth charge attacks. Hedgehog's silence proved especially valuable. Without the acoustic chaos of failed explosions, sonar operators could immediately assess the outcome of an attack. A hit was unmistakable. A sudden, sharp detonation at depth, while a miss produced nothing at all, allowing for instant reacquisition of the target. This efficiency compressed the timeline of an engagement, closing the window during which a U-boat might escape or hide beneath thermal layers. German commanders quickly recognized the shift. Interrogations of captured U-boat crewmen revealed growing anxiety about a new weapon they could not detect or counter. Depth charges were terrifying but predictable. Veterans understood their patterns, timing, and weaknesses. Hedgehog removed that predictability. There was no brace for impact, no opportunity to maneuver during a noisy attack run, and no warning until the moment of destruction. It made every sonar contact potentially fatal, forcing U-boats into increasingly cautious, defensive tactics that blunted their offensive capability. By mid-1943, as Allied escort groups refined their techniques, Hedgehog began reshaping the Battle of the Atlantic one precise strike at a time. Nowhere was Hedgehog's impact clearer than in the combat records of Britain's most experienced anti-submarine commanders. Among them, Captain Frederick Johnny Walker of the Royal Navy stood out. His escort groups had already become renowned for aggressive, coordinated hunting tactics, but Hedgehog multiplied their effectiveness. Walker's ships combined high-precision sonar tracking with repeated, rapid Hedgehog barrages, striking before U-boat captains could react or exploit evasive maneuvers. Instead of long, exhausting chases that ended in uncertain depth charge patterns, engagements now resolved decisively, often within minutes. Statistical comparisons made the contrast undeniable. Admiralty assessments covering thousands of attacks revealed that depth charges achieved a kill in roughly 1 out of 60 attempts. Hedgehog, once crews mastered it, achieved a kill in approximately 1 out of 6. This tenfold increase was not theoretical but operationally verified, based on surviving after-action reports and wartime evaluations. It reflected something deeper than a new weapon. It showed how integrating sonar, mathematics, and forward-firing ordnance fundamentally altered the nature of anti-submarine warfare. For U-boat crews, the shift was dramatic. Their survival had once depended on exploiting the blind spots created during depth charge runs. Now those blind spots had vanished. The human reaction onboard German submarines was equally telling. Memoirs like Herbert Werner's Iron Coffins describe growing uncertainty during encounters with British escorts equipped with unfamiliar tactics. Werner wrote of moments when his crew expected the usual pattern of explosions, only to experience a single, violent detonation without warning. Many survivors did not yet know the weapon's name, but they understood its implication. It meant Britain could now strike while tracking them continuously, and if one bomb made contact, the submarine would not survive. These fears were confirmed as more U-boats were lost with no preceding barrage, only a final impact far below the surface. Hedgehog created a new psychological environment, one where silence no longer meant safety. A U-boat commander could hear the destroyer above, track its position, anticipate a depth charge run, and instead be struck by a weapon he could neither hear nor evade. That uncertainty eroded confidence in long-trusted escape routines and made every sonar echo from an escort a potential death sentence. By the end of 1943, Hedgehog was no longer an experimental innovation. It had become a defining force in the Atlantic, closing the gap between detection and destruction in a way Germany had not anticipated. For the Germans who survived the war, the memory remained unmistakable. Depth charges were frightening, but Hedgehog was final. It represented a shift from calculated evasion to helpless uncertainty, from enduring bombardments to being struck by a single, silent descent through the dark. And for the Royal Navy, it proved that precision, not noise, was the future of anti-submarine warfare. Long after the Atlantic battle ended, veterans on both sides agreed on one truth. No weapon of the convoy war inspired more fear in a submarine crew than Britain's Hedgehog.